Good evening, everyone. Welcome to ACM. My name is Nora. I'm the Principal Curator for Islamic Art at ACM, but I'm also one of the co-curators for Let's Play. So today's talk is held in conjunction with the Let's Play, the Art and Design of Board Games special exhibition that is ongoing right now. So if you haven't catched it yet, I would encourage you to go and view it. We would like to thank the following donors for their generous support of this exhibition. The principal supporters, Dalio Philanthropies, the Fullerton Heritage Singapore, the Fullerton Hotels and Resorts, and the supporters, Ms. Ida M.H. Chow, and Grand Park City Hall. And let me share with you a little bit more about our speaker today. We have with us Professor Alex De Voogt, who is a professor at Drew University in the USA with a special interest in mancala games. In 1995, he founded the Board Game Studies Colloquium series, which continues to this day. He also co-founded and co-edited the Board Game Studies Journal in 1998. So Professor Alex has also published extensively on the history and archaeology of board games, as well as on contemporary gaming practices in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. And we're really glad to hear him speak today on tracing the moves of Congkak. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Alex to the stage.
So what I will try to do is explain to you how Congkak actually fits in what we understand about board games generally. And first of all, I would like to explain something about these types of board games. So I'm showing you 4 game boards. Only one is from Malaysia. Anybody know which one? It's unfortunately the top one. On these boards you can play Congkak, all of them. And on 3 of them we actually have rules that are either identical or very similar to what is, to you, Congkak. But in 3 different countries. And even there it's kind of surprising because there are 2 types of boards here. You see 2 rows of 7 and 2 rows of 6. And on 2 rows of 7 or 2 rows of 6, you can play multiple different games. So in St. Lucia, they don't play Congkak at all. St. Lucia is in the Caribbean. But they use a board of 2 rows of 6. So the boards don't always tell us what is played, and even the material cannot always tell us where it is from. There are some indications that I will go over later. Now, the other characteristic of these types of games are the playing counters, as we call them. They can be seeds, they can be pebbles, they can be shells, and here in Singapore and in Malaysia and in Indonesia we see a lot of cowrie shells being used, but also seeds, and that is true for all these games. So the top one on the left is Madoshi seeds that you find in the Maldives. On the right is Olinda seeds found in Sri Lanka, for instance. The Sesopina bonduk seeds on the 2nd row are very common in East Africa, and the kind of red-colored ones are common in the Caribbean. And then you see all kinds of cowrie shells there, different shapes and forms, including plastic ones, which is a novelty coming from Malaysia. All of these games, so rows of holes and a proportionate number of counters, are called mancala games. And it's a family of games that was recognized quite early on, that they all had something in common. The way you move, the way the board look, and the type of pieces that you have, all the pieces are the same. And that is what I will talk about in the beginning, and then we will try to set Congkak apart from those and see, okay, how is Congkak now different or special? The main take from this talk should be that board games, including mancala games, have played an important role in academia, in how we understand the world. So a sample of the different disciplines that have been involved in board games research is on the right. And it's not that cognitive psychologists tell us something about board games. No, it is that board games have told us something about how the brain works. So without board games, certain ideas about how memory works, how decision-making works, would have been left behind or would have been difficult to get in any other form. And that's the same for these other fields. So it has helped computer science testing their search programs. It has gave us new ways of looking at historical processes. It is now a tool in archaeology to actually date and sometimes understand an archaeological excavation. So board games have been important, have played their own role in academia. Now, you see a number of games here on the left. Chess-like games like Japanese chess, Chinese chess, and Western chess, drafts games, backgammon games, the whole list. And at the bottom you see mancala, the second row from the bottom, mancala games. There are a few modern games that have played some role, but mancala games are certainly more prominent. And you see a few names of games that you may never have heard of. Awari and Bao are some of the other mancala games. So the question is, to which discipline has Congkak, or mancala in general, contributed on the right? And so just this particular part. Is it computer science? Which one? Anybody? Which is unfortunate you didn't say anything, because it would have been correct. Because it's all of them. In all these disciplines have mancala games played an important role. And identifiable. And that's what I will explain to you today, some of the things that actually stand out and that have been of particular interest. And what we will do is look, okay, what about Congkak? Is then Congkak actually anywhere special in there or not? Is it something that was just marginal? So for that we need to see, okay, how is mancala different from board games, other board games? How is Congkak different from other mancala games? Before we then look at, okay, what is their role in the sciences? And I will look at the cognitive sciences, and that is mostly computer science and psychology, cognitive psychology mostly. But also at what we call cultural transmission theory, which is very interdisciplinary. So that is both history, archaeology, anthropology in combination. And I will explain to you what mancala games have contributed there. And then finally, I will just touch on that. That is art history, and that is more aspirational, I would say. So let me first explain a little bit about other mancala games. And also, this may help you to understand how Congkak is different if you're a Congkak player. And if not, you will see how mancala operates. This game has multiple names. They all kind of look the same. They're all cognates, as we say in linguistics. So wari, awele, oware, ware, all of those names are common. And they are common in two areas of the world, the Caribbean. Many islands, not all of them, but most islands have a game like this, and West Africa, large parts of West Africa. We have research on Ivory Coast, but we know it is in Nigeria, it is in many places in West Africa. And here you see some of the boards, and as you can see, the board on the left I showed you earlier, and the boards on the right look slightly different because they don't have those end holes that you actually need in Congkak, or at least they're very useful. So that's where you go like, oh, so maybe this is a different game, because they don't seem to need those. They use it for their capture sometimes. Sometimes it's just an ashtray, but it's not, it's not the most important part of the board. So that is one part, and I can show you also how it is played. So we're in Barbados, and there's a few things you should look for. It is moves that don't seem to go round and round and round, as you do with Congkak. Every time you move, you stop where you land, and that's it. You see them counting, because the big collection of seeds in one of them is strategically important. These are two master players. These are two others. And here you see an end game, and you see that they play fast, of course. And you also see that it progresses slightly differently from a Congkak game. Yeah? So this particular game has been one of the first that received quite a bit of attention from scholars. I'm mentioning Jean Rachitsky here because he was really one of the first to write an entire book about developmental psychology, so how children learn and how children can be studied by just using this game to see certain steps in their development, which was kind of innovative. And he actually brought somebody from Ivory Coast who studied with him and did another PhD on this topic as well. So he's kind of a first generation scholar of this particular game, and he did this in Ivory Coast. Later on, he went to Antigua in the Caribbean to continue his research. So he actually went to both areas because it's the same rule sets. So this is a 1990s, early, late 80s is when that really started for this particular field. Now, West African games, not Caribbean ones, but the West African games have something in addition. They are often what we call sculptured. So they take on many, many forms. It would be an entire different lecture. You can just do an entire lecture just about the sculptured mancala board, and most of them are from West Africa. So you see this stool shape on the top, which is very common. You can find it in many museums. And then you see at the bottom, similarly different types of sculptures. And this will become relevant later on because this is one of the few games where this is prominent. For other games, you have an occasional example, but it is nothing special. In the Caribbean, I haven't found any. There's all these logs of wood without any pretense even of being artistic. West Africa, different story. Same time period, 1990, the first book on the sculptured mancala boards from an art historical perspective was delivered by Rosalind Walker in the United States. So the West African Caribbean connection is very strong. And interestingly, they play exactly the same game rules, even though they are no longer in contact. And when did contact stop? Well, more than a century ago, for some places several centuries ago. So we have this thing which we call a cultural trait, which is something complex. So it's not just 2 rows of 6 holes. It is 2 rows of 6 holes with 4 seats in each, with certain rules played in a certain way, and that becomes kind of a complex cultural trait. And that we find in both places. We find 2 players, 4 in each, same rules, men mostly playing, same kind of context, in both places for hundreds of years. And this is very specific for mancala games because we have evidence of mancala games doing this over and over again in ways that are kind of spectacular. So you see this large arrow crossing the Atlantic. It's, of course, just one step. We go from West Africa, boom, to the Caribbean. So it is just one step. It happens to be a large arrow, but it is an important one. And something to remember for the remainder of this talk. We also have games that you may not have seen, but we have what we call 4-row mancala games. So double the rows that you play on. And here is an interesting example. And as you can see, there are no sculptured game boards here. We play in the sand or in the concrete. And here we are in Oman, where they play this game outside on the floor. Because it's concrete, they usually bring a piece of carton to make it more comfortable, and they play it competitively. So the very good players are really very good players. You can test them and they perform. But it's a very different site from what you are used to. And we have a few others, so this can become much bigger than that, which is the game of Owela, also known as Twi or Toes. These are names of exactly the same game. There's no difference, but it crosses cultures, multiple cultures, mostly Namibia, Botswana, southern part of Angola, northern part of South Africa. So we're talking about Southwest Africa. I was fortunate to actually find people playing it because I took pictures, but it was always empty. I always found boards in the sand somewhere next to the road with nobody there. But here we have players. These are Shumtwa in Botswana. And they play a little bit like in Congkak, that you continue your moves around the board, but it becomes a little bit strange because you see as if they're playing at the same time. And it is as if we have two teams playing, and which is true as well. The board is so large that one person usually takes care of the left side of the board and the other person takes care of the right side of the board. You don't have to play in teams, but it's kind of convenient to do so. And here you see you have a team of 3 against a game of 2, but the game takes a long time. So usually they rotate off, somebody goes, does something else, and then somebody else comes in and continues the game. It's a very... it was a good move. So, the last one I will show you, the 4-row game, is the game of bow. Here we have a few examples that are actually sculptured, that are actually nice to look at, because they always play on a wooden board. They rarely ever play in the sand. They always have a square there in the center of the board because it has special rules. And as you can see, again, they play in a club-like environment, and it's very competitive. The previous game is the largest mancala game that we have in the world. This is the most complex one. This is my own research. Was not the first to do research on this game. There was a Philip Townsend who did his first book on this in the 1980s. And I did my own cognitive psychology. How do these people perform so well in this game? That took me 3.5 weeks just to learn the rules. It was just the rules. So I'm going to show you a video, and there will be a quiz after, so to know if you do know the rules of the game. So it's a little test, so pay attention. Did you get it? So they change direction at certain places on the board only. When they start the move, everything is fixed. There's no more choices when they're playing. So everything is fixed. Everything they played there was calculated beforehand. They were displaying it out. They had been calculating for a while before they actually played these. And this entire complicated series of moves is calculated ahead. And that is kind of showing off what these people can do. Same guy is here on the left. This is the second book that came out 20 years ago about these games. Several things, because it is a whole story about African master players of games. They're mostly famous for sports, but they actually happen to be very advanced in several board games as well. And on the right are things you can do with Congkak as well. So you can take the starting hole there and just ask yourself, calculate where does this end? And keep going round and round and round and round, except you don't have this end hole that you use, but otherwise you just keep going round and round and see how far you get. And it's interesting because we did this with novices, people have never played mancala, and there seems to be a kind of a natural limit, about 4 or 5 rounds, where people usually give up, even if you pay them. This is the end. And that is a very helpful thing we will find out later. This is kind of a limit. So this is the simplest thing for a computer, and this is very hard for humans. We cannot forget things when we're going around, which would have been very helpful. We actually have to memorize each and every step. Right. So this last game, the game of Bao, is interesting for us as well because we have historical evidence, so it gives us a little bit more of a depth in time. This is one of those, an important one. It's a poem written up in the 1890s, but actually composed in the 1820s. And the poem gives us actually very important tells about the rules. So we actually know that the poet was familiar with the rules. He uses particular terms that are only used in this particular game. So we have kind of a history of the game rules, which is rare. Very often we have dictionary mentions of a game, but that doesn't tell us much. So if you have game rules, that's more important. And which is so far the earliest representation of any mancala game with rules from the 1660s. And there is a website there where you actually can read the translation and the background of this. We've done some extensive research on this particular source because it is the earliest reference of any mancala rules description in the literature so far. And as you can see, this is only 1660s, and we don't have anything before that. So anybody who tells you that mancala is 1,000 years old, there's no evidence. There's actually fairly little evidence that we have rows of holes that are much older. Most of those rows of holes are not necessarily games even. So this is roughly where we have to stop and say, okay, probably a few hundred years older, but that's not much more than that. So what does this tell us about cultural transmission, what we call this cultural trait that can travel? We find the game of Owela, the green arrows, all around southwest Africa. We find the game of Bao all the way in Madagascar. And if you go to Madagascar and you find players, they have no idea that it is played elsewhere. And since the rules are so complicated, it's kind of surprising because they play the same very complicated rules in the western part of Madagascar and on Zanzibar and on the Comoros and inland in Tanzania. So a lot of different cultural groups, but totally explained by the Swahili trade routes. So the Swahili trade routes just completely overlap with the spread of Islam, spread of the game of Bao, and that is what the cultural traits actually now indicates. But to this day, the rules are exactly the same. Even from the 1660s onwards. And that's very typical of board games. And apparently also of mancala games. And then you see a very large arrow, that's the game of Hawalis, because we have been able to trace it back to Mozambique. It's a much more complicated story. It's also found in the Seychelles, and Oman and the Seychelles have zero connection, except that they both had people from Mozambique working on plantations or as slaves. And they play exactly the same rules in the Seychelles as in Oman, as in Mozambique. So you see these large patterns of, in this case, migration of people, sometimes contact between people that these games illustrate. And that's important because if we didn't do this, we would have no clue why the game in the Seychelles is the same as in Oman. We would actually have to do some board games research and then finally understand, is there a connection that we missed, or is there another explanation of why these games are the same? And then finally, the topic of today. How long have we been talking? Half an hour, I'm finally getting to the point. So is the game of Congkak. And here you should immediately recognize that this is not just any game. And not even just any mancala game, because I'm straight away come up with some 19th century sources. And there is more. So this is already one of the few mancala games that has some historical references that we can use and that we can look at. Both actually with imagery, which is even more rare, which we do not have for the 1660 source, for instance. It's just text and a drawing. We actually have representations. You have more. This is all from Holland. It's Indonesian stuff that they have in the what was then called the Tropenmuseum, which is now a different name. It merged with other museums in Holland. And you see also depictions of it being used in classrooms and in museums very early on. So that's the first thing that you should immediately recognize for Congkak. That is kind of rare that we have historical evidence. And then the second thing, I told you that West Africa had these sculptured mancala boards. The only other place in the world where sculptured boards are common is here. Yeah, so in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, not so much in Philippines, but a little. We see sculptured boards from the Sultan who ordered this board here on the top left, to the boards that you will have here in the exhibit. And this is just a collection from a Dutch museum, just to illustrate how elaborate the carvings can be. And again, that is rare, particularly for mancala games that you might as well play in the sand. So why go to the expense of actually making a beautiful board like that? So it is a prestigious game. Like the West African ones, prestige is involved. Bao has a lot of prestige involved as well. There are only a few pretty boards for that, but one of them was given to the King Edward in London, so immediately you see that they are used as prestige gifts, and that is what makes mancala games in this region particularly interesting. Now, Congkak, under a different name, is played in the Maldives. I don't know if you've been to the Maldives, I can recommend it. Nice atolls, blue sea, good for scuba diving. But they also play a game they called Ovalu, and Ovalu means 8 holes, because they prefer 2 rows of 8, with 8 counters in each. They also play 2 rows of 7, and 2 rows of 6, and 2 rows of 10, 2 rows of 10 with 10 in each, 2 rows of 7, 7 in each, same as it is here. And it's hugely popular. And they imported the Malaysian ones, the plastic ones, and they make their own from driftwood because there's not much wood on an atoll. So all the boards look very different. And you can sometimes recognize them because they're one of the few people that actually make the boards in a locally specific way, heart-shaped end holes. So if you ever see a heart-shaped end hole, it's usually from the Maldives. It's the only place where they have a tradition of doing that, but not all of them. So some of them are just square. This is very curious, and I'll explain why. The third place where we play Congkak is in Philippines, where it's called Sungka. The name even is pretty much the same. And here again you see there are some sculptured boards around. These are from a museum in New York. And similar, I would say, to Congkak in that sense. The bottom left is very small. It's like a tiny little board. But again, it is sculptured and it has this imagery involved. Now this I understand, why in the Philippines and in Indonesia and Malaysia they play the same game. There's a lot of contact, not so surprising. Maldives, not so much. And why is the Maldives such a problem? Well, it's because of Sri Lanka. Everything in the Maldives comes from Sri Lanka. The language in the Maldives is Divahi, which is an Indo-European language, and the closest neighbor is Sinhalese from Sri Lanka. All their other games are found in Sri Lanka and in India. And in India and in Sri Lanka, they play mancala games. And if you ever played their game, it's very, very different. So when you go round and round, you always take the next hole instead of the hole in which you land. You take the next hole, you go, what? It's completely different. So it's very easy to distinguish the two. Immediately you can say, oh, that must be South Asia, because that's the only place in the world where they play mancala that way. And that's the same in Sri Lanka. That means that their mancala game in the Maldives did not come from Sri Lanka, but that must have come from further east. The 3 ladies here actually are playing with the 3 of them. You see 3 holes there for captured counters. And it's 2 rows of 7, and they always say that mancala games is good for arithmetic, so 14 divided by 3. Yes, I see everybody frowning. Yes. But that's how they play. So they play with 3 people, so 4 on the right, 4 on the left, and 6 in the middle. And that's why it's called Raja Pasamandari, because Raja is the king, he has 6, and the Mandari, the advisor and the pasa on both sides, they have only 4. And depending on how much you win, you move from being a king to a rajo or to a pasa or a mandari. And that's how you circulate your role in the game. It's the only 3-player mancala game I have encountered so far. If you have a tradition here of playing it with 3 people, please let me know, because it's fascinating to have this even exist. But that was not the point. The point was that they play in a way that is so radically different from what we know from Congkak. So it suggests that Congkak spread probably from Indonesia, Malaysia to Philippines, not the other way around. In the Philippines, there's only 2 rows of 7. That seems to be popular, nothing else. While in Indonesia and Malaysia, you have 2 rows of 6, 2 rows of 3, sometimes 2 rows of 9. There's a lot of variation. That is usually an indication that there is more to it. And then in the Maldives, we see the same, also variation, 2x6, 2x7, 2x8, 2x10. That's where it stops, so it's a little bit less than it would be here. But identical rules, with the one thing that they don't start at the same time. You sometimes seem to do that you both players start at the same time. They never do that in the Maldives. But other than that, it's identical. But how did it get to the Maldives? I mean, I asked, have you been to the Maldives? And most people said, no, never been there. 2 options. Trade or migration. And why do I say migration? Because you do not introduce a game with a single person if you want it to be exactly the same for a very long time. And it has been the same for a very long time. Yeah, so you want a group of people that have a tradition of playing it in a certain way, and that's very difficult to change. If it is one person, it usually changes very quickly. So either that or trade, but then it has to be very intensive trade. Regular trade for a long time so that a game can actually be exactly the same for a while. We can test the hypothesis. We can say, okay, well, if it is migration, we can rule that out or we can rule it in with some population DNA. Anyway, so just a little overview. Maldivian language is the same. The games are the same, except for the mancala game. Everything else is the same. We can find it in Sri Lanka and in India. There's no historical trade relations that we know of necessarily with Indonesia and Malaysia. And there's no known migration, but let's check. So, we did that with a study because the Maldives had not been studied for population DNA. It was just a white spot. And these are Y chromosome haplogroups. Only men are used for that. And you can very clearly see that the overlap with the East is almost non-existent. And the overlap, which we expected with South Asia, is very strong. The same happens if you do the mitochondrial DNA, which women have as well, and that's more complicated to do. But again, there's no clear signal that we had some kind of migration going on from Malaysia. Which means that probably it was a trade relation at some point. And that's very interesting, if it was a trade relation. Because if it was a trade relation, if you look at this picture or pictures of people in the Maldives playing, you see they're all women. So if it is trade relations, then the trade should have been dominated by women. And do we have any evidence of that? So, as you can see, just one mancala game poses historical questions. And now we are looking for trade relations in history that may have been there and that were also dominated by women. There is some evidence now that a Chinese trade was there, dominated by women at some point in time. There are some speculations about this, but we haven't necessarily solved that puzzle yet. Now, Congkak, although it's called differently, Ovalu, and something else happened in the Maldives that makes it stand out, probably because of that rule that you never play simultaneously. It's very popular, and they solved the game. I don't know if people solve the game here. You can tell me. Maybe some of you expert players solved it as well. It means that you start and you end up in that end hole. You play again, and you play again, and you play again, you play again, and I play again, and it's like, you know, this is not a game, you're just playing by yourself. And you play again, and you play again, until there is less than 4 counters in the opposite row. So not only have you won, but if the other person wants to fill their row, all their holes are closed, as we would say. All their holes are no longer in play. You have won not just the game, you have won the series. You have won the whole championship, basically. They did that. We started asking computer scientists, can you do this? Oh yes, we can do that. They did it for 2 rows of 6 and 2 end holes, of course. And they had 415 solutions, and oh, people are taking pictures, you're cheating. You should find your own solution to this. So 2 rows of 6, 2 rows of 7, there's an unknown number of solutions, this number of solutions is actually quite high. 2 rows of 8, 2 rows of 10, and all of these configurations exist, and all of them have solutions of that kind. And as you can see, 415 is a lot. No, it's not. What we call the game tree, the number of possibilities in the game, is so ridiculously high that 415 is actually a very small number. It's kind of a needle in a haystack, basically. This is not something you can just do trial and error. That will take you forever. So, what do we have? We have the 2 by 8, because that's the popular one in the Maldives, solved. So if you find that not many women who know how to do this in the Maldives, but a few who do, will start, never stop, and you never actually have a chance. There is no, you sit there just for no reason. Yeah, it becomes a solitaire game. Now, I give you an example solution, and I'm not giving you the one that they came up with in the Maldives. You find your own, there are plenty. But interestingly, we tried to figure out, okay, so there are many solutions. How can we explain that they found one, and actually that one? So to start with, the shortest solution is here, and was not that one. So they found a solution where you start again and again 92 times. That's the solution that they found. And that is not random. That is not, okay, they just randomly found something. We used the information that we had, that we understand about human cognition, and we said, okay, let's see regular patterns, patterns that are very obviously starting in the same way, and that's probably what you do as well. You see some things that are very common. And then if they need to start calculating, let's put the cap at 4 to 5 rounds, because that is what we are able to calculate without actually playing it out. We could explain about half by just doing that. So we clearly know that it was done through calculation and through pattern recognition. This is extremely unusual. Actually, it's the only competitive game that we know of where the players themselves were able to solve it. The computer came after. So this is just to show you that there is a pattern that you may recognize. You start at the far end, and if you start at the far end, you always end up in that big hole. And if you then start at the other far end, you always end up in that far hole as well. And if you take then the odd numbers, you can do this a few more times, and you always end. That's what I call a pattern. That's an easy pattern to learn. And then at some point you're stuck. You go, okay, now I have to come up with something else. And that's where the calculation steps in. All right, so what did they do? Pattern recognition. Not more than 5 rounds, which we knew from research on other mancala games. You're not getting the shortest solution. Actually, if you try to memorize the shortest solution, it's very awkward. It's like you're doing random things all the time because everything doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. And it is remarkable. It is really special that people were able to figure this out without a computer or anything. Even though there are many possibilities, there are needle in a haystack. If you wanted to calculate how many possibilities you have with a 2 by 8, it is stunning. So quite an accomplishment. So here I'm giving you an overview, just some references, just to show you that research on these different fields has been ongoing, started early, particularly in math, for instance. This was an early interest and continues to this day, so I put some recent ones in there. For all these fields, we have this material going on and on and on, and it's not over. So mancala games continue to play an important role in the world of the sciences. This is the reason. The main reason is that board games, and that's why it was wonderful for cognitive psychology and for computer science, you can basically create something that fits exactly your parameters. Does it take a long time, a short time? Is it very complex? Is it less complex? And that way you can increase and check. With masters, sometimes we have even a ranking system that can help us. Okay, this is a very good player, this is the best player. And for cultural transmission, the same. It's a complex trait. It's not just rules and a board. It's everything together that can actually then show us if there is contact. So it's kind of a summary of what I'm trying to explain to you. Now, how does Congkak relate? Well, a few things for which it is unequaled. It is the first and only mancala game that was ever solved by the players themselves. This never happened before. And it's one of the very few games that is, competitive games that is dominated by women players. We have a few actually also in Asia where women and men compete together. In Western Europe that is very difficult to find, if at all. But where it is actually dominated by women is, for a competitive game, is particularly rare. It's also only the second game that was solved by a computer, by the way. So it's even just solving a mancala game is already very difficult. Now, I told you there was this new historical questions that we can glean from Congkak as well because of the presence in the Maldives. So we actually have some riddles to solve. The thing that we haven't done yet, and that this museum is, has given a stab at, and other museums are trying as well, we don't have a proper art historical study yet. We know that all these boards are there. We have not made an overview. We have not made the more important insights that we can make from art history. So the art historical part is still an aspirational part, where Congkak actually stands out as a perfect example to do so. And with that, I will leave you with this picture, but at the end of whatever you're doing, somebody has to win, and it was her, and the others were less enthused than she was. But I'm very happy to have been able to talk to you here in Singapore. So thank you very much, and if you have questions, please ask them.
Thank you so much. My mind is blown by the three-player version. Can I invite questions from the audience? Oh, yes, gentlemen.
Thank you so much for the very insightful talk. I did not know there were so many solutions and there was so much like uh, different variations of mancala around the world. Um, do all of these games share the same ending condition, and what are the main differences in ending conditions in the game? I mean, the game has to end somehow, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's a very technical question, but a very good one. Games end in mancala in two ways. The most common one is having the most counters at the end of the game. The other one in Bao, for instance, is emptying the front row of your opponent. So you may still have a lot of seats left on the other side, but if the front row is empty, then you have still one. There are a few variations of that because we have, particularly in Congkak as well, where people say, well, there is an ending condition and then we start over and then we change the game. So we also have an ending condition for a series of games. And that's what I would talked about with the solving of the game, that there's actually nothing left or just one hole. You still have one that particular game, but you have also a possibility of doing this series. So that would be the three things I would distinguish.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that sharing. I would like to ask, because I think you mentioned about the fact that there's the last because it comes from the mancala games, right? So the last dated like history of mancala was from the 1660s and stuff. And then would you say there was a variant, like it was picked up by maybe somewhere else? There was a variant of mancala before that. It was inspired from another board game, or whether it's just created then and there?
Yeah, so 6060s is the first reference we have. The game was older, for sure, perhaps a few hundred years. We don't have anything archaeologically that resembles Mancala games. The ones that we do have that look at least archaeological are later than the 1660s, mostly Ottoman. But there is no indication that it derives from another type of game. We have been talking about this too. So for backgammon, for instance, there's a Roman predecessor that very clearly is related, and that was the predecessor of what we now call backgammon. Lots of things that have in common. It is not that usual to have games merge into a different game. So even from antiquity, for instance, the Senate game and the Mehen game, they don't seem to have any kind of modern transformations. So I don't expect it for Mancala to be there. But since we have so much variation, it is still very much possible that it developed in multiple places at the same time. We cannot rule that out. It can be relatively old, but never found because it was played in the sand. Most of the variation is in Africa, so we expect it to have the longest history there. So that is all possible, but there's no record of it. And certainly not in archaeology, unfortunately. But no, there is nothing in archaeology that actually indicates anything that even resembles what Mancala would be like. Yeah.
Sorry, I just remembered this question. I think you mentioned that I think that because of like slavery and links between West Africa and the Caribbean, Congkak or Manchala spread to the Caribbean as well. What about the Americas? Like when the Europeans brought like slaves from West Africa to like the Americas. Is there any link in, like, for example, North or South America where the game exists? Just curious.
Um, yes, but very weak. So we have evidence that it is in Suriname. There is some evidence, but not much, that it may have been in Virginia. But actually, I haven't seen the evidence for that. The only place where the tradition has continued is on the Caribbean islands, and not on the mainland of the U.S. as far as we can tell. Yeah, that's pretty much the answer, I would say.
So I have a question about winning the Mancala game. Is there like a perfect strategy on winning the game? Like, for example, if both players play like very optimally, is the game like predetermined, like who's gonna win, lose, or it's gonna be very, or would it end up being a draw, if that makes sense?
So the only way to answer that is that you not only solve the game, or what we actually would say crack the game, but also solve the game. So you can find out what the optimal way of playing is, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can explain why that is the optimal way of playing. So that's the second part of it. So the only game for which this has happened is Awari. So they programmed that, they solved it, and they are also able to explain. Much of what they said is that ultimately it's a draw. There is no draw in Bao, for instance. So you cannot draw, even if you want to. So that does not, it does not tell what happens in Mancala games in general. It just happens to be the case for that one particular Mancala game.
Yeah, one more question, and about like, what does playing Mancala tell us about like human decision making under like uncertainty? So like, especially like, because when we're playing Mancala, we're looking into the short term, like how are we going to play now? So does this like impact the conflict with long-term strategy throughout the game?
Well, if you are a beginning player, you look short term. That's the same for chess or any other game. So the more advanced player you are, the further down the road you look, and that's the same for Bao, the very complex game that I showed you. People look up to 6 moves, both sides, And not only that, they do a complete search, which they don't do in chess. So they look at every single possible move in that whole scheme and calculate each of them before they come to a decision. So that is decision making for you. It doesn't really tell you something directly, but it tells you how we are strategizing when we have too many solutions to go through. That is called, multiple terms have been introduced through chess, satisficing. Satisficing is you do as much until you think you have done enough, which is how people go to school. If I get a C, it's fine. Or I get a 6, that's fine. That is satisficing. I go up to here. And that's what most people do when they're searching for certain moves. They go like, I like a move that captures, a bit. And that's the move I will play. And then I'll stop searching. Hardly anybody searches for the optimal move, because that's not possible. So there's a number of lessons that we learned through chess, but it seems to be kind of universal for all board games. I don't know if that answers your question, but perhaps partially at least. Yeah.
Good evening and thank you. You showed the map about the spread from Africa. Yeah. Then what's the link with Congkak? What's the likely origin of Congkak? Did it come from Africa or did it develop separately? Thank you.
Very good question. My answer would be that we cannot know that answer. So we can go as far back that we know how Congkak spread, and possibly even say where it may have started to spread, this type of rule, but not how all mancala games came about. It's very much possible that we have multiple places where they were invented. For Congkak, you could say, well, probably this area where you are now, Indonesia, is more likely because there's more variation here than the Maldives or than the Philippines. And the same with African games. You can see certain places with a lot of variation that's more likely to be the origin than the ones that only have one version of the game. I've been asked this question many times, what is the origin of mancala? Is it Africa or Asia? And I said, well, it's impossible to tell. And we cannot go that far back. And there is also no way of knowing. It's also not particularly interesting question. It's a very interesting question how these games got spread so far and survived so long, so that we can still today actually see that these people have been in contact in some way or form. And that's a more important insight that we have gained from that than that it perhaps was also African. So I wouldn't say either for the moment.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. And I'm not sure if my questions are within the remit of your research, but I have two questions. One is a cheating question. Most of the games have a way to cheat. Is it possible with Congkak?
Oh, yeah.
So I would like to hear more about it. And my other question is, these masters, how are they perceived in their society? So they have achieved this high status. They are obviously very intellectual, strategic thinkers. How are they rewarded? Are they in positions of, I don't know, organizing, managing the community? What is their status? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for both questions. Cheating is a cultural thing. So in some places, cheating is fine as long as you're not caught. And cheating is very easy in mancala games because you can easily hide a counter in your pinky and then drop it when you want to and make it a little bit, one step longer than you actually had if you calculated the thing. Cheating is almost impossible against master players because they calculate everything. So they will tell you, return that move. And he said, this is where you cheated. And that is embarrassing. And that also means you're not a master player because you need to cheat in order to win. So there's different levels. And yes, you can easily cheat. I have seen it and people have it pointed out. And it's very difficult for a beginner or for a researcher even to figure out if anybody's cheating. Because you have to become a decent player before you can do that. Now, the second question, remind me. Oh, the prestige of master players. Well, I would say it's pretty much the same here. So you may have expert Congkak players, and I don't think they have a leg up in politics or in any other way of society, and that's the same there. You're famous within your community of players. And that you happen to know the world champion of chess is kind of an anomaly because you probably don't know the world champion of checkers. That person is famous in Holland, but not here, or actually anywhere outside of Holland, I would say. And that's true for most board games. So more board games have master players. They're very well respected within the community of players, and outside of the community, there's nothing. I did some checking with the players from BOW to see if there's any kind of connection with, you said, intellectual ability. Schooling. It's a Muslim community, so how often they were married, or how many wives they had, how many children they had, their jobs, etc. Make a full list of all that, what you could possibly document. And it was the full range. Because people went to university. There is no university in Zanzibar. It's very rare to go to university in Zanzibar. And we had somebody who went to university. There was somebody who was basically the guy in the picture. He cleaned the market after the market. It was one of the worst jobs ever. He used to sell coffee. That was better, but this was just terrible. He's missing most of his teeth, but he's very photogenic. It's very interesting. He is divorced, no children, 100% failure in any and every aspect of Zanzibar society, but a brilliant player. So they did something similar for chess, and they found a link with some math ability, but we don't know if it is math people who are attracted to chess, or if it is chess that actually develops math, or there's no causal relationship really. So that may actually be a relation that's not particularly useful or significant. So I hope that answers some of it.
Yeah, we have time for one last question. Okay, if not, I want to ask a question. Whether, in looking at all these different places, whether mancala has been used in a more ritual or ceremonial context.
I was never looking for that. The anthropologists that have written about mancala only look for that. So sometimes we have descriptions of mancala, and it's only because it was used in some kind of ritual. It is rare. What I would say, it's more common to find it in certain festivals. So where there is a time where you play that is more relevant than that the game itself is particularly significant. People have made a lot of suggestions because the names of the games or names of the holes, that is a representation of all kinds of things, and it is possible. But if you ask the players, half the time that is completely irrelevant when you play, or irrelevant while you're fascinated by the game. It's almost always fascination by the workings of the game and by the interaction with humans winning. Then ritual. We have documentation of rituals. They exist. It's the first thing that is documented because anthropologists like that part. But it has been used to determine who is the next king in some West African places. It doesn't happen anymore, but it has been documented. Nowadays, I see very little of it. There is some talk about the origins of board games in general, and that includes mancala games, that it has a divinatory origin. So divination was the first thing that would happen, and then later it became a game. You can also turn that around and say, if you play a game, you actually introduce some uncertainty, and then you can make the game useful for divinatory purpose. And it was the same with the king. You actually had to divine in certain ways, and that's how you play a game to actually determine the winner. So that's how I would answer that. It's not very satisfying, but that's that.
Okay. Okay. All right. Then let me just bring this session to a close. Thank you so much for joining us. And as we wrap up the year, we would like to thank all participants and patrons for support. And we hope to see you next year for when we have talks, and when we have the information, we'll put it out.